Well, good morning, New Addington. It's good to be with you folks this morning. You'll see me on Zoom in a few minutes' time. I hope you're keeping well. It's been a long time, so it seems, since I last visited in person, but then again, I think that's the same for all of us. Being in person in church seems like something from a bygone era. So, we now have the Prime Minister's roadmap to the resumption of what we might want to call a regular existence. I use the word regular quite a lot instead of normal, because I'm not sure if normal is the right word in this context. Maybe not the right aspiration. So I think of the word regular when I think about actually being able to sit down for a cup of tea with someone or invite someone round for dinner. The rest of it, what we might like to call the new normal, might have to take a while to take shape as we think about the long-term impacts of the pandemic, be they emotional, economic or cultural. As we journey towards that day, I felt this morning I should share with you some words which will hopefully cause you to reflect on the shape of your next chapter of ministry and mission to New Addington as we emerge blinking into this brave new world after COVID. As you reflect on this period of season and unpleasant disruption and dislocation, it should really give us all an opportunity to pause and reflect on our priorities and indeed the kinds of communities we would aspire to be. What is God saying to us through this time of change? So I'm going to read to you from 1 Corinthians 9, 1 Corinthians 9 from verse 19 to 23. Though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak, I became like the weak, to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. Last September saw 20 years pass since I began my adventures in pastoral ministry at Hertford Baptist Church in the home counties. There I was, in the millennium year, a profoundly inexperienced graduate of what was then called London Bible College, recently appointed as assistant pastor. I hadn't even gone to college to become a pastor. I found the job on the jobs board. That was it. Preaching? Well, I think I'd preached, more or less 7-8 times before actually taking up that role. Crazy. Yes, I was an experienced worship leader, youth and children's worker. I'd held leadership and management positions at work, but for pastoral ministry experience, I was very raw. For those of you who are a bit older, you might remember the song by the Boomtown Rats, I Don't Like Mondays. Well, for the first few years in pastoral ministry at least, I grew to love Mondays. Basically, it represented another day I'd survived to Sunday. That's how I felt. However, what I did have when I started, and what I still have, is a calling and a burning desire for the UK church to recapture its calling and desire and vision to be a missional movement and reshape itself to be effective in mission for the 21st century. That's why I became a pastor. My calling wasn't to become a sort of traditional pastor teacher per se, but someone like a pastoral evangelist. To put it bluntly, I didn't become a pastor to look after people, or just to look after people, or to maintain the church. Important those things are, but to be a prophetic voice, urging the church forward to engage with our ever-changing society, rather than to become an irrelevance as we're tuned out. And as for being team leader of London Baptists, a role that I've held for nearly 5 years now, that role I continue to perform in this position. That passage from 1 Corinthians 9 is one of my core texts. It always has been. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. Part of the Apostle Paul's genius was how that he was able to move across cultures in his ministry. He really was amazing at it. He was able to interpret and contextualise the gospel for different audiences. Jews. Paul was a Pharisee, extremely well trained. Such a good Pharisee that he persecuted the church before he met Jesus on the road to Damascus. So he could share the gospel to Jews in a way that they would understand. Greeks. Paul was a Roman citizen. It certainly came in handy. He knew different languages. He knew different cultures. He was able to reach out beyond his sort of Jewish heritage into a very, very different setting and share the gospel in that. Slaves, free people, philosophers. We read about how he talks to them. Ordinary folk. You know, sometimes we have this view of Paul, I think, in the 21st century, that he's this rather austere figure, quite a strict figure. Maybe that's not always a bad thing. But one thing he certainly wasn't was inflexible. If it wasn't for his skills and abilities in the power of the Spirit, adapting to the different settings that he faced, the church would not have grown as fast as it did. God used him for great effect. Now for us too, in our multifaceted, multicultural, fragmented world, both in a micro and macro way, we too are required to be all things to all people, to be adaptive. And the pandemic really has only accelerated a process that was already in place. Our world has changed and is changing rapidly. Our government is not very supportive of the church. We don't live in Christendom anymore. The rules that might have applied in previous generations about what people's perceptions are of the gospel have also changed. People no longer necessarily know the story. People no longer necessarily think that, well, almost certainly don't think that they're sinful in need of a saviour. You know, whereas in a previous generation we could rest upon the internal programming of people to innately feel perhaps they ought to get right with God or get a bit of churching up. Nowadays, really? Not when only 7% or less of the population go to church. You know, I like to think, you know, you see those preachers down at Tooting Broadway Station, my local underground, and, you know, they're faithful people trying to share the gospel. But sometimes when someone comes up to you, you know, and said, "Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb?" and you said that to someone in Tooting, they might turn around and go, "No, I'm vegan." Subcultural jargon. People don't get it anymore. Sometimes I think if the Spirit is poured out on all peoples today, will they feel the need of getting right with God and being convicted of sin? Or would they just go, "Oh, I feel nice and tingly"? It's something I think about a lot. What does it mean to be all things to all people in society? You know, as we journey towards this new normal, I hope you can wrestle with that question, New Addington. Because you must, if you're to have a vibrant future. You know, in my role as team leader, I've visited many churches. And yeah, there are some great work going on out there. Bright spots, faithful people doing all sorts of lovely things. Great pastoral care, great compassionate ministry. But the ageing congregations, the demographic time bomb, the lack of children and young people, young adults, good grief. You know, you could be the best minister in the world in some churches and, you know, you could see baptisms, you could see conversions, but within 10 years your church would be half the size, simply because of demographics. And the fact is, with the amount of elderly folk we have in our churches, with the greatest of respect to all of you brothers and sisters, there'll be a lot less of us around when they're not here anymore. We are hard pressed. So we have to think about how we are engaging with the society around us. The world is changing. And that means creativity. It means being flexible like Paul was flexible, sharing the gospel in new ways, building new community, something which the pandemic is teaching us. I mean, before the pandemic, I didn't even know what Zoom was. Seriously. Some of our smaller churches are showing the way to our larger churches because they're more flexible. You know, there are some churches which, there's one church in particular, Deepwater, which is Norman's church, Norman the association administrator, down near Bromley, near Hayes. It's not far from you guys. They've got 14 members. They're getting thousands on YouTube hits because Darren, their very creative minister, is very into sharing the Bible stories with Lego. He does something called Bible Builders. Of course, we all know what Lego's like today. It's a massive, identifiable brand. People get it. It's a way of sharing the gospel. We're using something to share the gospel. There are other examples too. I often ask myself the question, what shape will the next move of God take? What shape will it take? Do we believe there will be a next move of God? I hope you do. I do. You know, I think in some ways this period is showing us the benefits of stopping and reflecting and taking an assessment of where we stand and where we're going as a church, ready to emerge into a new season of renewed ministry and mission. That's my prayer for all of our churches as we go forward. You know what happens to churches and denominations when they experience a move of God? They get stuck. That's how denominations were founded, really. They tend to apply the same formula forevermore. Methodism. John Wesley, great evangelist, wanted to renew the Church of England. Church of England wouldn't change, so they started up a new denomination, and they got stuck. Baptists, you know, when we were founded in the Radical Reformation. You know, we didn't want to be under the control of the state. We wanted freedom to study the Bible and gather together, and were persecuted as a result by the state church. I don't often tell the bishops that. But who are we reacting against now, when very few people go to church, where the state church really has very little power compared to what it used to? I could go on. Pentecostalism. The formula becomes institutionalised rather than held lightly. You know, as a dissenting tradition ourselves, you know, what are we going to dissent against in this era? Who are we today? You know, putting it another way, if John Wesley was ministering today, or one of the early Baptist pioneers, I'm pretty sure their approach would change and they'd accommodate the setting which we are in today. And that challenge is for each one of us, individuals, churches in their local expression. You know, the pandemic has scattered us forcefully into the communities. You know, we're church scattered nowadays, most of the time. What is God calling you towards? Where do we grow from here? That's the title of my talk today. I would urge you, friends, not to rush back to normal. You know, let's not kid ourselves. Normal never was. At our ministers' conference online a few weeks ago, I shared this quote, which was widely circulated on social media last year. Sonia Renee Taylor. She said this: "We will not go back to normal. Normal never was. Our pre-corona existence was not normal other than we institutionalised or normalised greed, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, extraction, disconnection, confusion, rage, hoarding, hate and lack. We should not long to return, my friends. We'll be given a new opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and nature. She's speaking from a sort of global perspective, but it should resonate with us in the church. We too are being given an opportunity to stitch together a new garment, maybe a new wineskin, dare I say it, if you want to be biblical about it. One that fits the new wine, today's context. I hope you can be thinking and praying about that and discerning about that in this next period, so that you can become all things to all people and save some of them by whatever means are possible. I will conclude with one point that Ken Benjamin shared. Ken Benjamin, former pastor of Chichester Baptist Church, former president of the Baptist Union. He travelled around the country during his president year. He now works for the London Institute of Contemporary Christianity. And he said he saw three things that we need to focus on to do better if we're to engage in these matters of change in a new era of ministry. He said, firstly, there's a deep need for the church to discern well, which is for you guys to come together, discern the mind of Christ, find out where you are heading as a community. Listen to God. Secondly, there's a need to distill well. Discern well, distill well. And Ken said that because basically one of the things we have to also think about during a new season of ministry is what we stop doing. You know, one of the things that churches really struggle with, and this is where my experience comes in, is actually choosing to not do something anymore that they might have done for a very long time. Sometimes that's even more hard than starting a new thing. And, you know, we have to have a seasonal approach to ministry. Otherwise, we end up like the denominations that get stuck. So we need to distill well. And finally, his third point is that we need to disagree well. Now, that is not really the spirit of this age. Disagreeing well is certainly not very 2021, especially when you look at the political sphere or social media. Can we model a better way in church life where we can discern and distill and disagree and move forward together as one body? Now, if we did that, I believe we would have a transformational community. So I'll leave those things with you to mull over and to consider. May God bless you as you continue to seek his leading for this church and this community in the coming months. Amen.